Hi, welcome to Chapter 12, Social and Personality Development in Adolescence. In this chapter, we're going to look at theories of social and personality development, self-concept, moral development, and social development. These are the objectives we'll be covering. First of all, Freud called what's called the genital stage as the last stage of personality development, which includes both adolescents and adults, where the primary developmental task is to have the libido or sexual energy channeled into a healthy sexual relationship, and psychosexual maturity is achieved. Erikson, on the other hand, had the identity versus role confusion stage, where the primary developmental task is the achievement of a personal identity, which includes the identity attains a sense of self-continuity, reflects an understanding of one's unique traits and how they manifest across stages and social roles. And here's a little video here, my psych lab video on adolescence identity and role development and ethnicity. First of all, with Erikson, the sense of self becomes integrated because of rapid growth and sexual changes of puberty. First of all, there's an identity crisis where identification with peer groups protects against emotional turmoil. And then there's role confusion, which results from the inability to have an integrated view of oneself. New demands and roles create many challenges at this stage. Marcia's theory of identity achievement identifies statuses rooted in Erikson's identity process. The identity formation has two key parts. Crisis, which is a period of decision-making in which old values and choices are re-examined, and commitment, where the person follows some specific role, value, goal, or ideology. These are the four statuses. Identity achievement involves both crisis and commitment. They have been processed. Moratorium is the one they're currently experiencing crisis, but no commitment has been made. Foreclosure is where there's commitment without crisis, where the person accepts parental or culturally defined commitments. Identity diffusion is where there's no crisis or commitment. The quest for personal identity continues throughout the lifespan, with alternating periods of instability and stability. Family is rooted in and influenced by current cultural assumptions. This is figure 12.1, page 297 of your book, where you have the four identity statuses proposed by Marcia and based on Erikson's theory. For fully achieved identity, a young person must have both examined his or her values and goals and reached a firm commitment. So what influence does culture have within this theoretical perspective? As you know, family is rooted in cultural assumptions and strongly influenced by current cultural assumptions. Next is the effects of teenage employment. Working may decrease a teen's chances for successful adult careers. In the United States, teens tend to work a lot more hours than any other high-income nation. The more hours teenagers work during high school, the more likely they're to become sexually active, use drugs, display aggression towards peers, argue with parents, get inadequate sleep, and be dissatisfied with life. Those are some pretty negative consequences. Unskilled work is more likely to be associated with poor outcomes than its complex skilled work. Students appear to gain confidence in their ability to achieve economic success in adulthood when useful skills are developed. So the question is, to work or not to work, what do you advise? On one hand, teen employment may be correlated with developmental outcomes because teens who work differ from those who do not in ways that are also related to such outcomes. What variables do you think might distinguish teens who choose to work from their peers who don't? Are there developmental outcomes that have not been addressed by the research described in this discussion that you might be positively affected by teen employment? So you decide. Next, self-understanding. Components of understanding. Academic self-concepts come from internal comparisons and external comparisons. The internal comparison is to a self-generating ideal of who we want to be. External comparison is comparing ourselves to another peer's performance. Social self-concepts predict behavior. The perceived lack of competency in family relations appears to be distinct from other components of self-concept. This is figure 12.2, page 299 of your book. Appearance is a prominent factor in preteen and early teen self-understanding, but notice it becomes less important in later adolescence. In a more abstract definition of psychological self, it's comprised of enduring traits, beliefs, personal philosophy, and moral standards. The person is able to see oneself in different roles. As a student, then with friends, with parents, and with romantic partners, etc. There's also, with self-concept, there's gender differences. They have a different manifestation by gender. Girls are influenced by internal and external comparisons. Boys' influences are more internal and self-defined. Self-esteem, a sense of global worth. Overall, self-esteem rises through adolescence, but it drops at the beginning of adolescence. High self-esteem is associated with positive developmental outcomes such as good grades or resisting peer pressure. Boys are more likely than girls to either have continuous high self-esteem or rising self-esteem during adolescence. With the gender role, parental attitudes and parental behavior become increasingly important in shaping teens' ideas about gender and sex roles. Masculine and feminine are not polar opposites, but dimensions along a continuum, which we talked about in a previous unit. Sandra Bem's typology talks about masculine, feminine, androgynous, and undifferentiated. Androgynous and masculine gender roles are associated with higher self-esteem among boys and girls. Feminine gender identity is more prone to rumination. Adoption of an androgynous or masculine identity by girls lead to lower self-esteem. Can you see how dimensions of masculinity and femininity interact to produce different types of sexual orientations? Do these orientations make sense to you? Next is ethnic identity. This is self-identification as a member of their specific group. It involves a commitment to that group and its values and its attitudes. The development of some ethnic attitudes about group to which they belong is often poorly supported by the dominant culture. Family support and teaching helps form a strong sense of ethnic identity. Jean Finney's 3 stages of ethnic identity formation involves the unexamined ethnic identity, includes negative images and stereotypes common in the wider culture, and how one's own group is perceived by the majority culture. Next is the ethnic identity search. It's triggered by some experience that makes ethnicity relevant. And finally, the clear ethnic identity results from the resolution of conflicts and contradictions. Some choose their own ethnic group pattern exclusively. Others choose a bicultural identity, consistently flowing between the ethnic and majority cultures. Role models in life in the media. Azabe Mensa surveyed 4,500 African American boys and asked them to name a role model. A large majority named a professional athlete. No child. What? No child out of 4,500 African American boys listed a teacher as a role model. This highlights ways in which the media portrays various careers and the influence these portrayals may have on children's career aspirations. Here's something to think about. How might frequent interactions make it less likely that a child will review someone as a role model? In your opinion, to what extent are the concerns developmentalists have expressed about African American children's response to celebrity and everyday role models applicable to children of other ethnicities? Finally, characteristics. Achieving identity may be more complex. The difference between biological aspects of race and psychological nature of ethnic identity. There's a range of factors that interact with the teen's personality. What are some of these factors? Hazing and emotional trauma, family variables, neighborhood variables, presence of other salient identities. There's possible clashes between parents' cultural values and the new culture, such as communal versus individualism for Asian American teens. They may feel guilty about achieving individualist strivings. So it's a conflict between what's good for family, don't shame the family, don't stand out. Where in our culture, the goal is to stand out and prove that you're capable. Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral reasoning. There's 3 levels with 2 substages at each level. There's what's called pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Pre-conventional reasoning, judgments are based on positive or negative consequences to the child. The protocol response to moral dilemmas, and there's 3 stages. There's a nice little psych lab experiment on moral reasoning, which will help you understand these stages better. Level 1 is a pre-conventional reasoning, where judgments are based on sources of authority, usually from parents. The outcome or consequence of an action determines the rightness or wrongness of the action. So stage 1 is punishment and obedience orientation. There's physical consequences that determine right or wrong. If he is punished, it's wrong. Stage 2 involves individualism, instrumental purpose, and exchange. You should do things that are rewarded and avoid things that are punished. It's kind of law and order stage. It involves what's called naive hedonism. If you help me, I will help you. Level 2 is conventional reasoning. Judgments are based on rules or norms of a group to which the individual belongs. Stage 3 is mutual interpersonal expectations, relationships, and personal conformity, sometimes called the good boy, nice girl stage. Good behavior is what pleases other people. They value loyalty, respect, trust, and maintenance of mutual relationships. Stage 4 is individualism, instrumental purpose, and exchange. There's a norms of large reference group, a stage of social systems that are conscious, adhering to a complex set of regulations, morality, and legality are equivalent. Next, level 3 is called post-conventional reasoning. Judgments are based on emergence of personal authority. Stage 5 involves social contracts and orientation. This is where rules, laws, and regulations ensure fairness. Laws may need to be ignored to ensure fairness. Civil disobedience is deliberately breaking laws that are believed to be immoral, which leads to stage 6, universal ethical principles. Orientation, where explains moral decisions are based on universal ethical principles, such as the right to life. Now, figure 12.4, page 305 in your book, these findings are from Kolbe and Kohlberg's long-term longitudinal study of a group of boys who were asked about Kohlberg's moral dilemmas every few years from age 10 through early adulthood. So this is kind of a long-term study. As they got older, the stages or levels of their answers changed, with conventional reasoning appearing fairly widely at high school age. Post-conventional or principled reasoning was not very common at any age. Now, longitudinal research relating to parenting styles and family climate to moral reasoning suggests that Kohlberg is right about the need for social support. Age and corresponding cognitive development are needed to progress from stage to stage. A decline of egocentrism is critical. Role-taking improves an adolescent's ability to reason from another's perspective. Support from the social environment is needed to sustain moral reasoning. So growth of moral reasoning is associated with increases in adolescent pro-social behaviors and decreases in antisocial behavior. Now, longitudinal research relating to parenting styles and family climate to moral reasoning suggests that Kohlberg is right about the need for social support. Age and corresponding cognitive development are needed to progress from stage to stage. Okay, next, let's do, this is figure 12.5, and it also shows percentages of children and parents who show moral reasoning at each of Kohlberg's stages. And notice stage 4 and 5, very few people make it past that, make it to that level. Okay, some criticisms of Kohlberg's theory. For instance, respect for elders is essentially more important than justice in some cultures. So non-Western cultures do not fit well with Kohlberg's system. Now, although justice is an important moral concept around the world, justice does not supersede all other moral considerations in non-Western cultures. Nancy Eisenberg said, empathy, the ability to identify with others' emotions, both cause and consequence of moral development. That this inability to control emotional triggers or antisocial behavior, there's age-related and individual differences in the ability to regulate emotions. So age-related and individual differences in ability to regulate emotions should be considered. Carol Gilligan notes two distinct moral orientations, both the ethic of justice and the ethic of care. Girls' reasoning is based on care orientation, where boys rely more on a justice orientation. Recent research into sex differences suggests a North American bias as well. Neither adolescents nor adults reason the same way in every situation. Situational factors also may determine actual behavior. Negatives associated with childhood onset problems include display of overt aggression, rejection by peers, support from other delinquents, parents with histories of antisocial behaviors, likelihood to use drugs and alcohol, truancy and dropping out of school, and early and risky sexual behaviors. Delinquents lack empathy for parents, for the victims. They're behind in their peers in moral reasoning because of deficits in role-taking skills. At childhood, onset problems are more serious and more often persist. Temperament and personality play a role. Parents who fail at early attempts to control bad behavior may worsen the behaviors. Delinquent adolescents may exhibit serious disturbances in thinking. Adolescent onset problems typically reflect peer group influences. Adolescents who engage in serious forms of anti-social behavior have low levels of moral reasoning, lack empathy, and they're vulnerable to situational factors. Next is cyberbullying. It's a form of aggression in which electronic communications is used to inflict harm on others. So in other words, they're using social media to hurt other people. It's often accompanied by aggressive behavior in other contexts. Allows aggression with anonymity that can distance the perpetrator from the immediate victim response. Now, delinquency applies specifically to adolescent behavior that violates the law. Teens diagnosed in adolescent onset conduct disorder, typically milder, more transitory, may be a reflection of peer group pressure, limit testing. It's characterized by a lag of behavior behind moral reasoning. They're unable to look at their own or assess hypothetical offenses from a victim perspective, and they're likely to display a cluster of other problem behaviors. So what are some interventions for aggressive teens? Many teens do not feel safe at school. 7% have been threatened with a weapon. 33% have been threatened with physical fight. There's a program called the Fast Track Project for aggressive elementary school children. There's special classes, signals like yellow, red light. Parent communication, emotional recognition of others, strategies for controlling feelings, managing impulses, resolving peer conflicts. The results is a decrease in frequency of aggressive behavior, more effective emotional management, and interaction with peers. So you decide on which of these two statements. When adolescents behave aggressively, they should be referred to this fast-track project rather than be punished. Or do you believe number 2? Programs such as a fast-track project should not take place of punishment. Both punishment and emotional management skills are important in helping violent teenagers, oh, that was a Freudian slip, learn to behave less aggressively. Next, adolescents have 2 contradictory tasks: to establish autonomy, but also maintain relatedness. There's a rise in conflicts with parents and adolescents. It usually centers around everyday issues such as chores or personal rights, hairstyles, dating, and amount of parental supervision. These parent-teen conflicts appear to cause more stress for parents than for teens. However, strong attachment to parents matters. The relationship remains strong during adolescence. Strong attachments are associated with academic success and good peer relations, as well as a risk for drug use and antisocial behavior in later life. So it may be influenced by pubertal status. Friendships become increasingly intimate. Teens tend to share more inner feelings and secrets. They're more knowledgeable about each other's feelings. They're more stable than those of younger children. Electronic communication, such as email, has become more important to teen friendships. Thus, today's teens have a wider range of friendships than earlier generations. Considerable variation in interpersonal skills is needed to maintain friendships. It's important to learn negotiation and conflict skills. The reasons for ending friendships reflect differences in the rate of development of social skills. Individual differences involve temperament, personality, experiences, and rate of social skill development. The importance of popularity and peer acceptance strengthens from elementary years and peaks in early adolescence. Here's a little video here on intimacy in adolescent relationships. Next, peer groups remain relatively stable. They share values. Usually they hang out with people with shared values, behaviors, and identity status. Explicit peer pressure is more likely directed towards positive activities. Here's a little video on adolescent quick clicks. These provide an identity prototype. Labeling others and oneself as belonging to a group helps create or reinforce the adolescent's own identity. It also identifies friends or foes. A clique is 4 to 6 young people who are strongly attached to each other. In early years, cliques are same sex. Crowds are larger sets that include males and females. They break down into heterosexual cliques and then into loose associations of couples. Crowds are popular between 13 and 15, when the teen is more likely to display the greatest conformity to peer pressure. Now, reputation-based group is where the teen identifies with the group either by choice or by peer designation. Romantic relationships. Some relationships focus on love and others on companionship. Gender differences. Girls derive more psychological intimacy from early relationships than boys do. Early dating and early sexual activity are more common among the poor of every ethnic group and those who experience early puberty. Relationships proceed at a faster pace for girls than for boys. Skills gained in relating to other sex peers and friendships and mixed groups prepare them for romantic relationships. Social competence in a variety of relationships prepares teens to move to romantic relationships. For instance, physical sexuality coupled with skills in personal intimacy, the sense of being in love is an important factor in adolescent dating patterns. And here's a little video on dating in adolescence. Finally, homosexual teens. Boys act on same-sex attraction earlier than girls do. Social support from clubs and extracurricular activities is important for gay and lesbian teens, especially since the suicide ideation is much higher among homosexual teens. They're higher risk for suicide ideation. Therefore, groups such as, I just drew a blank, but there's groups that can be helpful. There's, gee, I just draw a blank. That's okay. It'll come to me later. That concludes this unit, and have a great week.